Hello everyone. Welcome to Economics for Business. My name is Arnold Height and I've been teaching economics here at Charleston Southern since 1990. In fact, I was the first PhD in economics hired here after they started the MBA way back in those years. So I've been doing it a long time. Before I was here, I was at the Citadel for about 6 or 7 years, and before that at Texas A&M, and before that at Clemson. So if you do the math, you'll figure that I'm pretty close to retirement. But I still love economics, and I hope to share that love of economics with you and maybe infect you with it. This class, Economics for Business, is a brand new class. It's actually quite unusual. Before this class, we had two kind of quantitative econ classes, one in micro and one in macro, and they were electives. This is a required class, and it basically pulls the highlights of those two classes, those things that the graduate faculty here in the College of Business thought were important enough to require all graduate students from the College of Business to have. So, this is the first time the class has been offered, and I would be interested in your feedback. In fact, I truly am interested in your feedback because, well, I want to make the class as good as possible for years to come, even though I might not be the person who is teaching it. Okay, so let's get started with a very short PowerPoint that I have introducing econ. The first thing I need to do is figure out how to get my image off of here. I think maybe that will do it. And then what happened to my PowerPoint? Here it is. Okay, so let's begin with the fundamental assumptions in economics. There are only two. That is that we live in a world of scarcity. Scarcity is all around us. Even things that you might think are abundant, like water and air, when you really think about it for a while, you realize that even those things are scarce. Obviously, water, or at least fresh water, is very scarce in many parts of the world. But even here in Charleston, where it rains quite often, water is not free. Similarly, air, you might think, well, air is free, but actually not. There's not enough air for us all to have all the air that we want. So you and I might only want air for breathing. But if you think about it just a little bit, you realize you also need air to drive your car. And if we all drive our smelly cars too much, the air gets too dirty. Maybe not here in the low country of South Carolina, but in many parts of the country and the world, it's quite a serious problem. Not just that, we also use air to carry off our waste products in many industrial processes. Here where I live, we have paper mills actually all across the state, and they are actually quite smelly, and they use the air as a way to haul off, I think it's sulfur dioxide. So there's really not enough air for everybody to have all that they want. Everything is scarce. Some things are obvious, some things less. But in economics, we make this assumption that everything is scarce. And in the face of that, individuals have unlimited wants. That is, you can always think of something else that you might want on top of whatever you have at the moment. It's nice to say, oh, I have everything I need, or I have everything I want, I'm content. Actually, it's a good feeling to say that, but if you look at it objectively across the whole country or across the whole world, it's really not true. We have unlimited wants. Now we have some foundational claims in economics, and these things are mostly accepted by everybody, but I think many would pick at a few of them. So let's begin. First, opportunity costs are real costs. That is, opportunity costs, the thing that you have to give up in order to do something, are truly real. Real in the sense that those opportunity costs will affect your decision to do a thing. There's many, many examples of this, but let's just do a very simple one. Imagine a young baseball star right out of high school, or baseball was probably the best example, where maybe you're a high school pitcher, but you're just so exceptional that you get an offer to play Major League Baseball, or at least you get drafted into some Major League teams' camps. So, but that that kid would also have had many offers to play college baseball, probably for full rides. And so when a kid like that decides to forego college and to play Major League Baseball, many will say things like, oh, that was a really bad decision. They could have got their college education for free. But what you have to realize, whether the decision was good or bad, I can't say, but what you have to realize is that education was not free, because there is still the opportunity cost. 4 years or 3 years of playing college baseball has a real opportunity cost, and that is the lost income that that player could have earned by choosing to go ahead and enter Major League Baseball. So maybe that sports example isn't a good one for you, but just know that opportunity costs are real because they impact people's decisions in very real ways. Your decision to go to graduate school has lots of costs, some costs that you can calculate, like tuition costs, lost income, and so forth while you're in school. But there is also the opportunity cost, which is very real. That is the cost that those opportunities that you have to give up, maybe being with friends and family while you're studying for my class or others. Another one is incentives matter. This one's kind of a no-brainer. Of course incentives matter, but many times people forget, especially about negative incentives. The classic example is the person who is on some kind of income assistance. Let's suppose that you, or maybe your family, is so poor that you're receiving governmental aid. And then something happens and you get a little job, and maybe this job earns you a couple of $100 a week. Well, once that income is reported, then your governmental assistance is cut by exactly the same amount. It's as if having a 100% tax rate on people whose income is very, very low. And so it follows logically that many of them won't choose to work, even though in the long run it might be better for them to do that. In the short run, it really isn't. Incentives matter. Marginal thinking is kind of an odd thing, but it's important in economics, and we claim that decisions almost always are made at the margin. It's really rare that the decision is, hey, should we build that $10 million factory or not? Usually the decisions are things like, should we expand production 1 or 2%, or should we contract production? Should we move the price a little bit higher or lower? Marginal thinking. Most decisions are made at the margin. Maybe all decisions are made at the margin. Trade creates value. This one is one that many people don't understand. When two people trade, they must both sense that they're better off after the trade. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Trade creates value. Even if maybe nothing is even produced. Maybe you have an old car that you don't really value much anymore. It just is parked in your driveway, and you sell it to somebody. It's a trade. So you get money, something that you value more than that old car, and somebody else gets that old car, something that they valued more than the money. Trade creates value. Okay, so now I want to share with you one of the skeletons in the economist's closet. Now I like telling these stories about, bad decisions that were made in economics, especially if they're way back in history and not a bad decision that I made. But you have to keep in mind that there are skeletons in the closets of science in every discipline, not just econ. But since my area is economics, I'm going to share this one. There was this guy, Thomas Malthus. You might recognize Malthusian theory. He lived in the late 1700s, and he made a famous prediction in 1798. He predicted that the limited resources, which is an assumption, remember we live in a world of scarcity, that limited resources in the face of population growth, which they could see back then, will cause humankind to experience widespread starvation. It sounds a little odd to us nowadays, but back then this was a serious, serious problem, and it pops its head up again and again through history. When I was in college, people were really concerned about population growth and how it was going to doom us all, and there were a lot of very weird movies. There was one I remember starring Charleston Heston called Soylent Green. It's a terrible movie, but it is iconic, and if you've never seen it, you should probably do a YouTube search or something to see if you can't find it. And then there were similar episodes in many TV series. But anyway, Malthus made this prediction. So he actually plotted out what he was thinking. So he said food production through time rises at some kind of linear rate because we clear more farmland and maybe cultivation practices might get a little better. So food production would go up year after year after year. But he said population production would go up exponentially, and of course those people need to be fed. So food consumption, which was tied to population, would ride in this exponential function. And so Thomas Malthus felt like he was living about here, where food production was a little bigger than consumption, but not a lot bigger. And he predicted there would come a time when food production just barely would cover the needs of food consumption. And for all the years after that, we would have chronic starvation. This is a prediction made in 1798 about a future that Malthus thought was maybe 20 years out from when he lived. So 7 billion people later, here it is in 2021 when I make this video, 7 billion people later, what happened? How could Malthus have been so wrong? In economics, we ask, okay, what is a human being? So just in the sense of economics, not in a theological sense, but in the economic sense, what is a human being? Is it that a human being is a burden, a cost, or just another mouth to feed? It's a little bit harsh how I've described it, but many people look at it like this. You're probably old enough to remember these programs that we had for a long, long time to try to restrict population growth in countries that we were trying to get to develop. That whole idea was that each little baby is a burden to society. It's just another mouth to feed. So this is one way of thinking of a human being. But another way of thinking of it is a human being is an asset, a resource, a wealth-generating machine, a creative being who can flourish given the right environment. The economist that best expressed this, his name was Peter Bauer, and he passed away maybe 25 years ago. He spent his whole life arguing this, that it's better to think of human beings as an asset instead of a cost to society. And he, I think, at least in my opinion for the most part, has been proven correct. Now here's another way of thinking of the very same thing, but in this case let's just use supply and demand. So supply and demand is something we're going to cover in these first few lessons, but you've probably seen it before. So Malthus would look at it like this. There was a supply curve for food, and there was a demand curve for food, and all Malthus could see was this increasing demand curve for food because of population growth. He only saw that, and so he made this prediction that out here someplace there just wouldn't be any food. What Malthus was unable to see was what's happening at the same time to the supply curve for food. It would shift out as there were new and better varieties of crops were discovered, as there was new technology, new mechanized machines to help harvest the food. Malthus couldn't see that. In fact, you might be surprised to know that the total amount of acreage, that is farm acreage in cultivation today, is less than it was 100 years ago, in spite of the fact that there are many, many more mouths to feed. And you might ask, well, how is that possible? And it's possible because the yield per acre has gone up so fast. In fact, the biggest problem we have now in the developed world is not chronic starvation. The problem that we actually have is obesity. Sure, there are people, some places in the world where life is unbelievably hard and people are truly starving. Those places are increasingly rare and are usually caused by something, almost always by war, sometimes by natural disasters. Okay, so Malthus Malthus has been discredited, but his idea, this kind of static thinking that came from Malthus, is everywhere around us. You're probably old enough to remember the same basic idea about oil, that we would run out of oil. Remember, don't be fuelish, save oil so that future generations will have some. And I remember when I was in college, there was a famous prediction that took a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal that said we would run out of oil and natural gas by the year 1982. 1982. And of course now oil prices are actually lower, adjusted for inflation, or lower today than they were way back in those days. I I can see it. I don't think I will live to see it, but I can see in the very near future the end of the oil age, at least using oil as an energy source. We'll probably still use it for many other things, but oil as an energy source is probably going to end in your lifetime. Not because we ran out of oil, but because other technologies made oil less competitive. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Let's just continue. So I want to just point out some economic dangers. I didn't like this title, but I couldn't think of a better title. Economic dangers. These are kind of mistakes, typical mistakes that people make often, that I would just like to bring to your attention so that you can guard against them. The first is the problem with models. The world is a really complicated place, and it makes sense to use models to help us understand what's going on and to search for solutions. If you think about it, a model is a simplified representation of something that's very, very complicated. So these models are really useful as long as the simplification leads us to a solution and doesn't cause us to forget important factors in the problem. I'll get to that in a minute. So models come in a lot of forms, but it's kind of easy to lump them as static or comparative static, and that's what the supply and demand model is. The supply and demand model, which I have, I think, 3 or 4 videos on that, is really about comparative statics. There's some equilibrium, then something happens to disturb the equilibrium. We kind of wait a few minutes for the dust to settle, and then we compare the old equilibrium to the new one. That's comparative statics. But it's easy to be lazy and to think that the world is like comparative statics, when actually it's not. The world is a very dynamic and chaotic place. And so sometimes our comparative static models fail to capture the dynamic changes that are occurring all around us, and then we are suddenly surprised when we finally come to realize that they're there. Another one is unintended consequences, and this is another problem of oversimplified models. So unintended consequences is something that wasn't on your radar, something that you didn't anticipate. You had an idea that you thought would create a solution, and then it turned out to create a new problem that you hadn't thought about. In economics, a really easy one to see is the call for a raise in the minimum wage. So people have a kind of naive view about how wages are established, and they will say things. If you read their essays or their letters, you will see that they just assume that the businesses are really rich. They might even speak of the businesses in derogatory terms, and it's just a matter of forcing them to pay workers what they deserve. But the truth is that wages are determined by productivity, and so if a worker is worth $50 an hour and you're only paying them $15 an hour, very, very shortly another firm will come in and bid that worker up, right? If they're truly worth $50 an hour, somebody else will come in and offer them 20, and somebody else will come in after that person and offer them 25, because there's money to be made by doing that, until finally an equilibrium is kind of established where the wages are commensurate with the productivity of the worker. So if you arbitrarily raise the wage, all you do is squeeze out those marginal workers. You squeeze them out, you lay them off, or they get replaced by some labor-saving machine, and they're not truly better off. We don't have to pick on economics to see this unintended consequence. It's everywhere. In fact, there's many of them in biology, if you'll just look, and in ecology, lots of unintended consequences of decisions that were made in the past that turned out to be really poor decisions. I'll never forget, I sat on a board of directors of a small nonprofit for a couple of years, and they had some land, and they were worried that we would find red cockaded woodpeckers on that land, and if we did, we would be unable to use that land in a way we had planned to use it in the future. And so a proposal was made to clear the land, even though we didn't need to do that. There weren't any red cockaded woodpeckers on the land at the time, but a proposal was made, well, we should clear that land so that to be sure that none come. It's an unintended consequence of a rule that was designed to protect those birds. And that's just one that I know about. There are many others. You might read about the history of wolves in Yellowstone. It's fascinating history when they removed the wolves, what actually happened to the ecosystem that they never anticipated. Okay, enough of that. So opportunity cost. Yeah, opportunity cost is a thing that's not on a lot of people's mind. You really need to think about it all the time. Here's a great example. So there's a little restaurant near where I live, and when they first opened, about 2/3 of the floor space was given over to art and kind of clever things that you could hang around your house. They were really hysterical mostly. And about 1/3 of the floor space was set out for dining. But little by little, I noticed that some of the shelves of all this stuff that you could buy, little by little, were taken down and more dining was established. Now, what is the cost of those extra tables? Well, an accountant would tell you that the cost of those extra tables is what the table cost us and the silverware, and maybe we got to upgrade the dishwashing machine and all that stuff. But they wouldn't think necessarily about the cost of the lost stream of income that's going to come from the sales of all those novelties that you could have gotten. Another great example was my father was a partner in a small retail grocery store way back in the day before grocery stores were really huge. And this is going to make you think I'm really old, but I can remember as a small boy my father struggling with a decision about whether or not to sell frozen food. Frozen food was a new thing, and to sell frozen food would require an investment in a new freezer. And so there is the accounting cost of the new freezer, but there was also the opportunity cost of whatever was in that space at the moment. What is it that you're going to not sell because you're going to put this freezer there in its place? Maybe you'll give up selling paper products or baby food or I don't know, but that is opportunity cost. It's a real thing. Specialization in trade. You might remember that Adam Smith is the one that said nations become wealthy by specializing in trading. It is the dynamics of specialization and the productivity that comes from that that allows us to live the modern lifestyles that we do. Think about the richest person 500 years ago. The richest person 500 years ago would be living like a pauper lives today. And it's all because of specialization. But the other side of specialization is that if we specialize, then we're not really self-sufficient. We require others, or we rely on others to trade us for those things that we need. So each of you are training to be highly specialized in some area of business, maybe marketing or finance or accounting, management, but those skills, the skills that you learn in this graduate program, don't teach you how to grow your food, build your house, all those things. So basically what you're doing is you're becoming very, very specialized in a narrow field, and you'll be very productive in that. You'll take the income that you earn from that and trade it for those other things that you need. But the problem with trade is it's a source of tension because it requires us to rely on others for things that we need. As long as the trade is kind of local, then it's okay because you can see their faces, right? You see Betty the baker or Bob the butcher or whoever down the street where you trade, but you can't see the people who produce your car or the people who produce the building materials in your house and so forth. You can't see them. They're just faceless people far away, and it's easy to think of them in all kinds of uncharacteristically kind ways. Trade is also disruptive. So if I buy something that's made outside of Charleston County, right? If I buy something made in North Carolina or Georgia, chances are it's going to cause somebody to not engage in some trade in South Carolina. It's disruptive. Nobody really cares about that too much. we don't have laws in the United States forbidding me to trade with people in the adjoining states, but we do have laws forbidding me to trade with people across arbitrary political borders, say between the United States and Canada, or the United States and Mexico, or the United States and the EU, or China, or some other place. And the arguments are generally that the trade is disruptive, that it causes jobs to be lost in the United States. Well, economics doesn't dispute that, but economics will point out that, hey, listen, trade's not the only thing that's disruptive. Technology is disruptive. When we when Henry Ford applied the concept of the assembly line to the production of automobiles, he disrupted everything. He basically killed off all of those little stables, those horse stables that were in every little town, and all those blacksmiths that were in every little town that were shoeing horses and repairing wagons and so forth. All those jobs were lost forever by a technological innovation that was extremely disruptive. But nobody is arguing that we should go back and somehow make automobiles illegal. And you don't have to talk about cars to see this. Think about the personal computer and how disruptive it was. Think about all the things that used to be done by hand that are now done by personal computers. Would we be better off if we had made personal computers illegal? I don't think there are many people who would argue that we'd be better off. But there are lots of people who argue that we're better off if we don't allow trade. But if you just put a curtain down in front of trade, you cannot tell as a consumer if the thing that you're purchasing is coming from a trade with somebody else who has a comparative advantage or if it's coming from technology. There's no difference. And in fact, there's a clever little cartoon video that I'm going to show you later where somebody claims that they have a technological innovation that can turn corn into cars. You'll see it later, and hopefully you'll like it. All right, now this is the last one I want to do. We're all in this together. Now that's a great sentiment. I actually like it. We're all in this together. But you might be upset when you hear that I don't think it's true. We're not all in this together. There's about 320 million people living in the United States. It's not like we're a big family where we have some person, some matriarch or patriarch who has that is our collective best interest in mind, who will tell us what to do. It's not like that at all. Instead, it's like that we have competing interests. What you want to do and what I want to do are competing for the same scarce resources. So, I've always wanted to have a house on the water, and probably you have too, and 100 other million people also want to do that, but there are not enough waterfront properties for us all to do that. And so there needs to be a way to allocate those scarce resources. And how it's done in a market economy is we basically compete with each other by bidding up the price. It's not like we can all sit down, all in this together. We can sit down and each of us can honestly say, how we feel, and then some person who loves us all will decide, okay, that person's, claim seems better, and allocate things. It's not like that. We need a system where we can peacefully coexist with each other. We can specialize and trade for the things that we want. And economics is really a study of one of those systems, and in my opinion, the best one, where we let markets, that is, individuals deciding in their own best interest what to do, what to buy, what to save, and so forth. That we are led, as Adam Smith said, not by the benevolence of the baker or the butcher, but by their own self-interest, that we are led as if by an invisible hand to provide those things that society values most. Okay, so that's the introduction to this course, and after this there's a series of lectures or little videos on supply and demand, after that on elasticity, then metrics of the economy, and finally macroeconomic models. All right, hope you found this helpful.